This chapter is looking at the internet, what it is and how it works. So we've already looked at LANs and WANs. The internet is a worldwide connection of networks. It's basically a wide area network which connects devices and networks from all over the world. It's the actual hardware, things, physical pieces of equipment that we can touch that connects all of these devices together. The internet is based on a set of protocols which we'll be looking at the next video. When people talk about the internet, a lot of people have this misconception that the internet is the actual website and the web pages. So people say the internet is Google. Google is not the internet. Google is a search engine that is used to search or browse the World Wide Web. The internet is the actual physical equipment that connects all of the networks together. The World Wide Web is a collection of websites, which means they are the actual pages on the internet. The World Wide Web is stored on web servers on the internet. They are accessed through the HTTP protocol, which we'll look at in the next video. So for the purposes of the exam, you're often asked, what's the difference between the internet and the World Wide Web? Well, the internet is the physical hardware and devices. The World Wide Web is the web pages hosted on the internet. In other words, the internet is hardware, World Wide Web is software. So the internet has many web pages on the World Wide Web, and each one of these web pages needs its own location, its own address. These addresses are called URLs. It stands for Uniform Resource Locator. If you think about the word uniform, the most common occurrence that you'd have seen of this word is probably in a school. So school uniform. That's because they are all the same. So it's like a pattern, like a default. So uniform resource locator. Resource is some sort of useful information or tool that we can find, and locator is obviously how to find it. So URLs are basically addresses that are used to access a web server and find that particular web page. If we take a look at the example underneath, HTTP is the first part of the URL. This could be HTTPS or FTP. Different types of protocols are always at the start of the URL. This is what protocol needs to be used to load that particular resource. The middle section in green is the domain name. So this is the kind of memorable name that you use for a company. The last section is what we call the path. Now this is the path to the specific page or file within that website. So by this stage, we're pretty much all aware that computers don't speak English. They all understand everything in binary zeros and ones, and everything needs to be translated at some point into their language that they'll understand. Now for websites, obviously humans aren't going to really memorize 192.168.170.13 for every single web page that they want to access. So how we get by this is we use a domain name server. Now this basically translates the website's domain name, or the URL, into its matching or corresponding IP address. So the internet has a whole network of DNS, so we do not have to remember the IP addresses. Makes it much easier for us humans. So to give you an idea of how DNS works, we can take a look at this table. So the domain name system holds the static IP addresses and their matching URLs. So here's 4 examples of very popular and common websites that you'll be aware of. Wikipedia.org, you can see the address that matches up to it, BBC, YouTube and Facebook. Each one of those will have a static IP address applied to it, and the browser will basically access the correct address when you type in the URL. So one thing we need to be aware of and understand to do with the internet is called the cloud. Now the cloud is very useful for us in modern day. If we look at it from this perspective, The cloud basically uses the internet, uses servers online to store files and applications. It's not just files, so when people talk about the cloud, they're not just talking about cloud storage, it can be hosted applications as well. So hosting is when a business uses a server to store files or applications on some sort of server. The most common is to host websites on what we call web servers. So the simplest concept of the cloud is probably cloud storage. It's the most well-known use of the cloud. Basically, if you've got an iPhone or an Android phone, you can back up all of your photos and messages and settings and applications on the cloud. Apple use iCloud and Android usually use Google Drive. Now these are online storage. That means your files are saved on a server on the internet, which means they are basically permanently backed up somewhere else. So if you were to lose your device or run out of space on your device, you can back up all of your files somewhere else and you'll be able to retrieve them if your device breaks or is lost. So the other use of the cloud is cloud computing. Now this is not to be confused with cloud storage. Cloud storage is storing actual files and applications. Cloud computing is where we run software which is hosted on the web. So an example of this could be Google Slides or Google Play. Google Slides is kind of like an online PowerPoint. Google Play is like an online music system where all of your music is hosted online. And Spotify is another one where you can play music that's hosted through the web. There are many others. For example, Google doesn't just have an online PowerPoint, it has Google Docs as well and Google Sheets for Excel and Word. So if we take a look at the advantages and disadvantages of using the cloud, they're not particularly difficult to remember or understand, pretty much common sense to be honest. If we look at the advantages, you can access your files from any device. So you can either use your mobile phone, you could use your tablet, you can use your computer. It means you can access them on any different device. You could also access your files from anywhere as well. Obviously you can log into devices in different areas. It's easy to increase your storage, so if you do start running out of space on your device, you can store a lot of files on the web server instead. We don't need to buy any expensive hardware. The equipment is basically owned by somebody else, such as Apple or Google. We don't need IT staff to manage the hardware. It's run and managed by another company instead. The data is always backed up and kept secure. So that means no matter what you do to your device, you've always got a backup and you can retrieve it at some point. The software is updated automatically, so anything that needs doing, any sort of bugs that need fixing or anything like that will be done without you having to do it yourself because it's done by that company. So the disadvantages are pretty obvious. You're going to need an internet connection, so if you've ever lost connection or run out of data, you're unable to access your files. You're dependent on the host. So what that means is if the server ever fails or the company goes down for some reason, you can't access your files. Data in the cloud can be vulnerable. Now what this means is that some particular servers could be hacked and your data might be corrupted or stolen. Ownership can be unclear. Some people think that they own the server because they're hosting some of their data there, and that isn't always correct. Sometimes there are subscription fees, so you might be allocated a certain amount of storage for free, but if you want any more storage you have to pay for it. Software can be slower to run. Now this is probably the most accurate disadvantage. If you try and run things online and your internet connection is not the quickest, then the software can run really slowly or not particularly well. Okay, finally we're going to take a look at virtual networks. So this term virtual that we've seen before, effectively it's a software based version of a real life piece of hardware. So in this particular case, a virtual network is where we've created what you will see as a network without the actual physical hardware. So a virtual network is defined as a software-based network. It's created by partitioning off, or basically sectioning off, some part of a physical network's bandwidth to form a separate network. You can set up several virtual networks on the same physical network, and they will all share the same hardware. The interesting thing about a virtual network is each virtual network has its own security, including its own firewall. So that means that we can set up username and passwords for each separate virtual network to make it a little bit more secure. These virtual networks can only be accessed by certain software or login information. A VPN is a term that quite a lot of people have started saying in recent times. It's virtual private network. So this is a type of virtual network. However, it's a lot more secure. It can be used to send data securely over a large network, such as the internet. This VPN can prevent people tracking your activity. So it's starting to become a lot more popular, where people are, in modern times, starting to get a little bit paranoid about who can see what they're doing on their internet connection. So VPN is again a software-based network, and it also shares the same hardware. However, it allows you to be a lot more secure. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you found it helpful. Please press like and subscribe. Thank you.